I stood in Terminal B with my rolling suitcase listening to the hum of the departure gate and the sound of my daughter telling me I wasn't coming to the Maldives. "I forgot to buy your ticket," Sarah murmured, barely making eye contact. "Just go home, Mom. We'll send pictures." I stared at her. Beside her, my son-in-law Greg suddenly found the departure screen fascinating. My two grandchildren, Lily and Sam, were busy playing on their tablets, completely unaware of the bomb their mother just dropped. "You forgot," I repeated, keeping my voice even. We had planned this family vacation for 4 months. I transferred $25,000 to Sarah's account, specifically to cover the flights, the excursions, and the meals for all of us. She had insisted on booking the airfare. "Let me handle the logistics, Mom. You just pack and relax," she had offered with a bright smile. Now standing under the fluorescent lights of the airport, the truth clicked into place. You don't just forget a ticket on an international flight. You don't show up to the airport without realizing a member of your party doesn't have a boarding pass. They had planned to leave me behind from the very beginning. "Mom, don't make a scene," Sarah whispered, glancing nervously at the other passengers. "We'll make it up to you, I promise. But right now, we have to catch our flight." A weaker woman might have cried. A more dramatic woman might have screamed, demanded her money back right then and there, or begged the ticketing agent for a last-minute seat. But I am 64 years old, and I spent 30 years working as a high school administrator. I know how to handle bad behavior. I didn't argue. I didn't shed a single tear. I just gripped the handle of my suitcase, looked my daughter dead in the eye, and nodded. "Have a good trip, Sarah," I replied softly. Then I turned my back and walked toward the exit. I left them thinking I was a defeated old woman. But as the automatic doors slid open, my mind was already shifting into a different gear. The taxi ride back to my neighborhood was quiet, save for the hum of the tires on the highway. I stared out the window, watching the familiar suburban streets roll by. I wasn't crying. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. For the past 5 years, ever since my husband passed away, I had become nothing more than a convenient safety net for Sarah and Greg. They lived only 20 minutes away, which meant my home was their free daycare, their extra storage unit, and their emergency bank account. When Greg's graphic design business hit a rough patch, I paid their car lease. When Sarah wanted the kids in private soccer leagues, my credit card was the one on file. I had excused their entitlement as the struggles of a young family. But today's betrayal was too calculated to ignore. She had taken the $25,000 I transferred to her checking account and booked flights just for her Greg and the kids. She probably assumed I would be too embarrassed or too passive to cause a fuss at the airport. She thought I would simply go home, feel sorry for myself, and eventually forgive her. The taxi pulled into my driveway. I tipped the driver, hauled my suitcase up the front steps, and unlocked my door. The house felt incredibly peaceful. No chaotic grandkids running through the halls, no Greg complaining about the Wi-Fi speed, no Sarah dropping subtle hints about needing money for groceries. I left my suitcase by the stairs and walked straight to my home office. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I wasn't interested in calling her to argue or demand an apology. Apologies are just words, and right now words were useless. I logged into my online banking portal. The screen loaded, displaying my accounts. The $25,000 was gone, yes. But they had made a massive logistical error in their plan to exclude me. The flights were paid for with my cash, but the luxury overwater bungalows, those were still reserved under my name on my platinum card. Before dealing with the Maldives, I had some regular housekeeping to do on my accounts. If I was no longer part of their family vacations, I was certainly no longer their financial backer. I clicked over to the Automatic Transfers tab. There, it was a recurring transfer of $600 on the first of every month to Sarah's account labeled Groceries/Kids. I hovered the mouse over the delete button and clicked. Gone. Next, I navigated to the linked external accounts. I found the payment portal for Greg's SUV lease. I had set up a direct draft from my checking account to cover it for just 6 months until his business picked up. That was 2 years ago. I canceled the authorization. Then I called my credit card company. I spoke to a polite representative and requested that Sarah's name be removed as an authorized user on my secondary card. She had used it for emergencies only, which somehow included daily coffee runs and premium streaming services. The representative confirmed the card was deactivated immediately. It took less than 15 minutes. In a quarter of an hour, I completely severed the financial umbilical cord I should have cut years ago. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt a profound sense of relief. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. My daughter had treated me like a free wallet, assuming my love for my grandchildren would keep me compliant. She had confused my generosity with weakness. I pulled my travel folder from the desk drawer. Inside was the glossy brochure for the Sun Siam Resort in the Maldives, along with the confirmation numbers. I traced my finger over the picture of the pristine blue water and the luxurious overwater villas. It was a shame I wouldn't get to see it in person. But it would be an even bigger shame to let Greg and Sarah enjoy a free stay on my dime after leaving me at the airport. I picked up the phone and dialed the international number for the resort's front desk. The phone rang 3 times before a cheerful voice answered. "Welcome to Sun Siam Resort. How may I assist you?" "Hello. My name is Phyllis Andrews. I need to cancel a reservation under my name," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly polite and steady. "Of course, Mrs. Andrews. Let me pull up your file." The keyboard clicked softly in the background. Ah, yes. 2 overwater bungalows for 10 nights. Check-in is tomorrow. I must inform you that canceling this close to your arrival date means you will forfeit the deposit, and there is a cancellation fee. "That is completely fine," I answered smoothly. Losing the deposit was a small price to pay for the peace of mind I was currently buying. "Please cancel the entire booking. Do not leave any rooms attached to my name or my credit card." "Understood. The reservation is fully canceled. Will you be rescheduling with us?" "Not today. Thank you for your help." I hung up the phone and set it on the desk. Just like that, it was done. Sarah had used the cash I gave her to buy their non-refundable airline tickets. They were currently flying across the globe drinking complimentary sodas and watching in-flight movies, fully believing they had pulled off the perfect heist. They would land in Malay, take the seaplane to the resort island, and walk up to the reception desk, expecting a pair of $1,500 a night villas waiting for them. Instead, they would find nothing. I walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. For the first time in months, I didn't have to worry about anyone else's schedule. I didn't have to cook a meal that accommodated Greg's constantly changing dietary restrictions or listen to Sarah complain about her neighbors. I poured the hot water over my tea bag and watched the color bleed into the cup. I had given them everything, and they had chosen to leave me behind. Now, they were flying straight toward a very expensive reality check. They would arrive in exactly 12 hours to a very unpleasant surprise. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, feeling surprisingly rested. I didn't have jet lag, and I didn't have a broken heart. I just had a schedule to keep. After breakfast, I walked through my house. Sarah had treated my home like an extension of hers for years. The hall closet was jammed with Greg's expensive golf clubs that he never used. The guest room was full of boxes of Sarah's out-of-season clothing and old baby gear she refused to donate. I picked up my phone and called a local locksmith. A nice man named Hector arrived within the hour. I had him rekey the front door, the back patio door, and the door connecting the garage to the kitchen. I paid him in cash and dropped the shiny new keys into my pocket. Once Hector left, I went to the garage and pulled out a stack of heavy-duty trash bags and cardboard boxes. I spent the entire afternoon clearing out the guest room and the closets. I packed up the golf clubs, the clothes, the old toys, and the random junk they had slowly migrated into my living space. I dragged everything out onto the covered side porch, stacking the boxes neatly against the brick wall. I draped a waterproof tarp over the pile and secured it with a few bungee cords. I wasn't going to throw their belongings away, but they were no longer welcome to store them inside my home. When I finally finished, the house felt lighter. The guest room was completely empty, ready to be turned into the reading room I had always wanted. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and went to the kitchen for a glass of ice water. The house was finally mine again. I sat at the kitchen island, enjoying the profound silence of a space that belonged entirely to me. Just as I took my first sip of water, my phone began to vibrate violently on the counter. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID showed a long international number. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. A notification popped up on the top of the screen: 64 missed calls. They must have landed, taken the seaplane, and finally reached the resort reception. I took another slow sip of my water, unlocked my phone, and pressed the green answer button. "Mom!" Sarah's voice shrieked through the speaker so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Mom, pick up the phone." "I am on the phone, Sarah," I replied calmly. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice echoing slightly, likely from the high ceilings of the resort lobby. "The front desk says our reservation is canceled. They said the card on file revoked the authorization. You have to call your bank right now. It's a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I answered, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I canceled the reservation yesterday afternoon, right after I got home from the airport." The line went dead silent for a full 5 seconds. I could hear the faint sound of tropical birds and gentle waves in the background on her end. You canceled our rooms?" Sarah stammered, the aggression dropping out of her voice, replaced by sheer panic. "Why would you do that?" "Because I am not on the vacation, Sarah. I don't pay for hotel rooms I don't sleep in." "But we're already here." "We flew halfway across the world," Greg yelled in the background, his voice frantic. "Tell her to fix it, Mom. You can't do this to us." Sarah pleaded, her tone shifting to the familiar whiny pitch she used whenever she wanted me to cave. "The villas are fully booked now. They have one standard room left, and it's $1,000 a night. We don't have that kind of money." "That sounds like a logistical problem," I murmured. "You told me yesterday you had all the logistics handled." "How can you be so selfish?" Sarah yelled, the panic morphing back into anger. "What about Lily and Sam? Your grandchildren are exhausted. They need a place to sleep. You should have thought about where your children would sleep before you stole my money and abandoned me at Terminal B," I replied. "You are a 40-year-old woman. Greg is 42. You have your own credit cards. Figure it out." "My card is maxed out," Phyllis Gregg shouted into the phone, clearly hovering right next to Sarah. "Then I suggest you find a cheaper island or book a flight back," I stated, entirely unbothered by his volume. "Mom, please, just call them and put your card back on file. I promise we'll pay you back when we get home. Please, don't ruin this trip for the kids." "You ruined the trip yesterday," I answered smoothly. "I am done being your bank account. And just so you are aware, I have also canceled the auto pay for Greg's car lease and your grocery allowance. Do not ask me for money again." "You can't just cut us off," Sarah gasped. "I just did." "Goodbye, Sarah." I pressed the red button and set the phone face down on the counter. 10 seconds later, a text message chimed. I flipped it over and read the screen. "Sarah, you are unbelievable. We are going to have to stay in a cheap motel by the main airport. When we get back on Sunday, we are coming straight to your house, and we are going to have a serious talk about how you treat your family." I smiled. She still thought she had authority over me. She still thought my home was her territory, a place she could march into and demand submission. I deleted the message and turned the phone completely off. I had my own plans to make now. Later that evening, I turned my phone back on to call my son David. He lives in Denver and works as an architect. Unlike his sister, David is fiercely independent. He pays his own bills visits twice a year and never asks for a dime. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom. I was wondering when you'd call. Sarah has been blowing up my phone for the last hour. I assume she told you what a terrible mother I am," I asked, taking a seat in my newly cleared reading room. David laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "She told me you canceled their luxury villas and left them stranded at a 2-star motel near the Malé airport. Honestly, Mom, good for you. I've been telling you for years to cut them off. It took me a while to see it, I admitted. But the airport was the final straw. She actually told me she forgot to buy my ticket right after I gave her $25,000. She's always been greedy." David sighed. "Are you okay, though? That's a lot to process." "I'm better than okay, David. I feel completely awake." "Good. What are you going to do now? You still have vacation time, right?" I looked at the blank wall where Sarah's boxes used to sit. I was thinking about booking a cruise, somewhere cold. "I'm tired of hearing about tropical beaches." "Do it," David encouraged. "Go to Alaska. Book the best suite they have. You earned it." After we hung up, I opened my laptop. I didn't hesitate. I found a premium 10-day cruise to Alaska leaving from Seattle on Monday morning. I booked a balcony suite, paying for it with the money the resort had refunded to my card. Sarah and Greg would be flying back on Sunday afternoon, exhausted and angry. I knew exactly where they would go straight from the airport, but I was fully prepared. Sunday arrived with a heavy gray drizzle. I finished packing my suitcase for Seattle, leaving it by the stairs. I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat by the living room window waiting. At 3 p.m., Greg's leased SUV aggressively turned into my driveway. It jerked to a halt, and the doors flew open. Sarah and Greg stomped up the walkway. They looked miserable. Sarah's hair was frizzy, and Greg was sporting a peeling, uneven sunburn. The kids were nowhere in sight. They must have dropped them off at Greg's parents' house first. I stayed in my chair as Sarah marched up onto the porch. I heard the familiar jingle of her keys. She shoved her key into the deadbolt and turned. Nothing happened. She yanked the key out, checked it, and shoved it back in, rattling the doorknob violently. "Mom." "Open the door," she yelled, slapping her palm against the heavy oak. I stood up, smoothed my cardigan, and walked to the entryway. I unlocked the deadbolt, but I kept the thick metal security chain firmly engaged. I opened the door just a few inches. Sarah glared at me through the gap. "Why isn't my key working? And what is all our stuff doing out here under a tarp? Are you crazy? Your key doesn't work because I changed the locks," I replied calmly. "And your things are outside because my home is no longer your storage unit." Greg pushed his way forward, glaring through the crack. "Phyllis, you owe us $20,000. We had to put the flights back and the motel on my emergency credit card at a terrible interest rate. You ruined our vacation." "I didn't ruin anything," I stated, keeping my eyes fixed on Sarah. "You planned a trip without me and you took it. I just refused to finance it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a white envelope. I slid it through the narrow opening in the door. It wasn't an apology, and it certainly wasn't a check. Sarah snatched the envelope from my hand and ripped it open. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a printed list of the canceled auto pays, the groceries, the car lease, the secondary credit card. At the bottom, I had written a short note. I am your mother, not your bank. Do not contact me asking for money again. Sarah stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing silently. For the first time, she looked genuinely frightened. The reality of her actions and the permanent loss of her financial safety net finally hit her. "Mom, wait," she stammered, dropping the aggressive tone. "You can't just shut us out like this. How are we supposed to pay for the car? How are we going to cover the trip debt?" "You'll have to figure that out on your own," I replied softly. "Just like you figured out how to leave me at the airport." "Phyllis, be reasonable." Greg started pushing against the door. I didn't let him finish. I simply pushed the door shut until it clicked, slid the deadbolt firmly into place, and walked away. They stood on the porch for another 10 minutes, arguing with each other before finally getting back into their SUV and driving away. The next morning, I took a cab to the airport. I didn't look back. A week later, I stood on the private balcony of my cruise suite, bundled in a warm coat, watching a massive blue glacier calve into the icy Alaskan waters. I held a mug of hot cocoa, breathing in the sharp, clean air. My phone was safely tucked away in my cabin, completely silent. I hadn't cried. I hadn't felt a single ounce of guilt. I had simply drawn a line and stepped over it into my own life. I took a sip of the warm cocoa and smiled at the endless expanse of ice and water. I was finally free.